CEO poses as an immigrant worker. Manager calls IC, then this happened. Before we get into this story, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And if you enjoy stories like these, make sure to subscribe, as we upload at the same time every day. Olivia Carter's heart pounded as she glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror. With her hair tucked under a cheap baseball cap and her clothes deliberately scuffed, she looked nothing like the polished CEO she was. She took a moment to remind herself why she was doing this. Rumors had reached her desk about corruption, abuse of authority, and mistreatment of immigrant workers at her own food distribution company's warehouse. Instead of launching an investigation from on high, she had opted for something riskier. She would infiltrate her own business as a newly hired immigrant named Elena Rodriguez. The decision didn't come lightly, but what she'd seen in preliminary reports, unpaid overtime, sudden terminations, and even occasional threats to call IC, convinced her that the only way to get the truth was to see it with her own eyes. Stepping out of her car, Olivia felt her stomach twist with equal parts fear and excitement. This was the first time in years she'd felt so on edge. She was used to high-pressure boardrooms, but the stakes here were different. This wasn't just a business risk. If she got exposed before she could gather evidence, she might not be able to protect the workers she was determined to help. Almost immediately upon stepping into the vast warehouse, Olivia picked up on a distinct chill in the air. The space was huge, stacked with towering shelves that held boxes of canned goods, packaged produce, and various other items ready for distribution. Forklifts beeped incessantly, weaving in and out of narrow aisles. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a harsh glow on a workforce that seemed tired and defeated. Men and women alike looked like they were running on fumes, their eyes sunken, shoulders slumped. This was a far cry from the polished corporate environment she typically knew. Here, it felt like a separate world governed by a different set of rules. And it took only minutes for her to sense the first red flag. She saw a man in a bright orange safety vest barking orders at a woman who seemed new, just like Elena. That man, presumably a floor supervisor, was berating her for allegedly mishandling a box. But the woman looked confused, like she'd never been shown the correct procedure in the first place. Olivia could hear snatches of phrases. "You immigrants need to learn faster," and "Don't blame me if you can't keep up." The humiliating tone made Olivia's blood boil, but she had to bite her lip. She was here to observe and document, not to blow her cover in the first hour. She followed the orientation path as instructed by an HR staffer who seemed overworked but friendly enough, though that staffer never met her eyes for more than a split second. Then came the moment Olivia had been dreading, meeting her manager for the evening shift. Jake Reynolds, a tall, broad-shouldered man who carried himself like a drill sergeant, stepped forward. His expression was grim as he rattled off safety instructions in rapid-fire English. Olivia played the role of someone whose language skills weren't perfect, furrowing her brow and trying her best to look uncertain. Jake's gaze traveled over her with a skeptical narrowing of his eyes. "You Elena?" he said gruffly. Olivia nodded. "Where are you from?" The question hung in the air, laced with something akin to disdain. She answered with a generic, "Central America," hoping not to give too many specific details that might trip her up if he pressed further. Jake offered no polite welcome, no handshake, just a glare. "Don't screw up," he muttered, then turned on his heel, expecting her to follow. Olivia was led to a cluttered workstation near the cold storage section. The temperature here was kept unnervingly low to preserve certain types of produce. She noticed right away there weren't enough heaters or protective gear for everyone. People around her wore mismatched layers of sweaters and jackets, shivering as they sorted produce and packaged items for shipment. She recalled corporate memos promising the warehouse would be upgraded, that better conditions were on the way, but clearly, nothing had changed here. Jake, arms folded, loomed behind her. "You'll be moving these boxes onto the conveyor belt for the next 8 hours," he barked. "Keep it moving. No breaks unless I say so." It struck Olivia that the break policy was also a point of contention she'd read about. Officially, employees were entitled to specific rest periods, but the rumor was that management gave them out selectively. As her shift began, she forced herself to appear clumsy, letting her newness show. It didn't take long for her to see more questionable signs. 2 employees, both of whom appeared to be immigrants, quietly scuttled back to their station after trying to ask for help with heavy boxes. Jake rolled his eyes and told them to figure it out themselves. Another worker had a bandaged hand but was still being pushed to handle dangerous tasks involving sharp box cutters. Olivia felt a surge of protectiveness, but she had to maintain her calm. She reminded herself that she needed concrete evidence, not just outraged reactions. She discreetly observed how Jake handled every small issue. The more she watched, the more it became clear that he saw immigrant workers, especially those who didn't speak fluent English, as disposable. He'd snap at them in front of others, laugh about their accents, and in one particularly telling moment, joke about how easy it was to get rid of people if they became too much trouble. It was an open secret among the more experienced employees, who kept their heads down, frightened of losing their livelihood. By hour 2, Olivia's back was already protesting from the repetitive lifting. She quietly thanked her personal trainer for the stamina she had, even as she pretended to be more exhausted than she truly was. During a rare lull, she tried to make small talk with another worker, a shy woman named Maria who had kind eyes but seemed perpetually anxious. "He does this every day," Maria whispered, glancing nervously at Jake. "We've complained, but nothing happens." Olivia nodded, trying not to betray her hidden outrage. She could feel the tension festering in the entire warehouse, like an unspoken rule that you either endured the abuse or risked your entire future. And still, Jake's scrutiny never let up. He always seemed to be on the lookout for potential troublemakers, immigrants who might step out of line. Olivia pressed her lips together, determined to gather more. If he was this brazen on a random shift, what else was he capable of behind closed doors? Olivia's arms burned from hours of lifting as the night wore on. She kept glancing at the large, rusted analog clock on the wall, counting down the minutes to a break that never seemed to come. Finally, with a scowl, Jake gave the crew a 5-minute breather. The moment he announced it, half the group practically slumped to the ground, massaging sore muscles or chugging water. Olivia took the chance to quietly approach a cluster of workers who were huddled near the corner. Among them was Carlos, a wiry man who looked like he hadn't slept in days. He cradled his wrist, which was wrapped in a makeshift bandage. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her Spanish tinted with an intentional accent. Carlos gave a hollow nod. "I sprained it last week and never got time off. They say we're too short-staffed." His tone was resigned, as if he'd learned not to expect any sympathy from higher-ups. Maria chimed in. "Jake wouldn't approve any medical leave. We tried to talk to HR, but the forms vanished." She glanced over her shoulder, as though expecting Jake to be eavesdropping. Olivia felt a surge of anger. These stories matched the rumors that had first alerted her to potential abuses in her own company. She wanted to scream, to announce that this was not how her business was supposed to be run. But she swallowed her fury, reminding herself that exposing Jake too soon could jeopardize her entire mission. When the 5-minute break ended, Jake's voice boomed across the warehouse. "Back to work, all of you. And don't think I'm paying you for the time you just spent slacking off." Several employees exchanged nervous glances. Were they actually being forced to clock out for these meager breaks? The schedule pinned to the wall said nothing about break times, and the computerized punch system was in a small office near the entrance, accessible only to management. That meant Jake had total control over recording their working hours accurately, or not. Olivia had suspected wage theft might be happening, and this break scenario gave more weight to the suspicion. She forced herself back to the conveyor belt, letting her mind run through possible ways to gather hard evidence. Her phone was tucked into her back pocket, but pulling it out for documentation risked blowing her cover. Maybe later, she could sneak into the office or talk to HR after hours. For now, she had to play along. Jake clapped sarcastically as some of the workers rushed to their stations. "Hustle up, or is that too much for you, Elena?" His ridicule grated on Olivia's nerves, but she feigned a sheepish smile. Inside, she was seething. This kind of behavior went against every corporate policy she'd implemented, every code of ethics she'd championed. She resolved to remain patient. Exposing him would require a more strategic approach, and she wasn't about to let her emotions sabotage that. As the conveyor belt rumbled to life again, she saw that Maria was trembling slightly. The woman was probably exhausted and fearful. Olivia wanted to reassure her, to let her know change was coming, but she could do no such thing just yet. She would need incontrovertible proof that Jake was violating labor laws and creating a hostile environment. Only then could she swoop in as the CEO and end this reign of terror once and for all. By the end of the shift, Olivia had gotten enough glimpses of the warehouse's dysfunction to fill an entire report. Yet she knew she was just scratching the surface. The real question was whether Jake's cruelty went beyond nasty comments and unfair scheduling. If he was genuinely threatening to report people to immigration authorities just to maintain control, that raised the stakes tenfold. She lingered as the shift ended, watching how workers shuffled out in small groups. Some looked relieved to be going home, others just numb. Nobody looked content. One worker named Letitia gave Olivia a timid smile. "We're headed for the exit if you want to walk with us," she offered. Olivia joined them, noticing how quiet the halls became once the machinery was shut off. Outside, the air was crisp and night had fallen completely. Letitia said her husband worked a second job, so she had to pick her children up from a relative's place. Maria just stared at the ground, her expression weighed down by worries she didn't voice. All of them seemed united by unspoken fear. If Jake turned on them, they could lose everything. Olivia climbed into her unremarkable car, making sure no one was watching too closely. She started the engine and drove off, her mind racing. She was sure now that something was gravely wrong in her own company. The question wasn't whether she'd act, but how. She had seen enough to confirm that reforms were needed, but she suspected that Jake's intimidation tactics went further than she'd witnessed in a single shift. She was certain the bigger bombshells were still waiting to be uncovered. Tomorrow, she would come back as Elena. And if Jake tried to escalate his threats, if he really weaponized IC against his own workers, she would be ready. She had to be. She refused to let these people suffer 1 minute longer than necessary. When Olivia returned the next day, the tension in the air felt even more suffocating. Jake was in a foul mood, barking at anyone who so much as looked at him the wrong way. The forklift drivers seemed especially jittery, as if one wrong maneuver could cost them their jobs. Olivia kept her eyes open and her ears alert. This was going to be a day of revelations, she could feel it. And she just prayed she'd be able to protect the very workers Jake kept under his thumb. It didn't take long before the day's ugliness fully revealed itself. Olivia showed up earlier than usual, determined to gather more intel. She took a spot near the loading docks, where workers rushed to load large pallets of goods onto trucks. The chaos was immense, horns blaring, boxes piled high, and a flurry of clipboards and shipping documents exchanging hands. She saw Jake station himself on an elevated platform, arms crossed, eyes roaming the crowd like a hawk scanning for prey. It was a grim spectacle, seeing how his presence alone seemed to make everyone more nervous and prone to fumbling. In the first hour, he had already shouted at 3 different employees for inefficiency. And that was when Olivia spotted something truly alarming: a group of new hires, easily identifiable by the temporary badges clipped to their shirts, receiving zero training on machinery they were about to operate. One of them nearly tipped over a forklift's load because he wasn't told how to balance the weight properly. Jake reacted not with guidance, but with scornful laughter. "You people can't figure out the simplest things, can you?" he bellowed, not even bothering to conceal the mockery in his voice. Olivia's blood boiled, but she forced herself to remain in character. She moved closer, pretending she was searching for some plastic wrap or packing tape. That's when Jake's gaze zeroed in on her. "Elena!" he shouted, beckoning her forward. She approached, feigning mild anxiety. He pointed to a stack of boxes. "Get those loaded pronto. The truck leaves in 20 minutes. She nodded, then started lugging the boxes over. Each one was heavy, but she managed, pushing her muscles to the limit. Within minutes she was sweating, her heartbeat thumping in her ears. She considered the privilege she had, knowledge that she didn't truly rely on this job for survival, that she could end this charade whenever she chose. But these workers didn't have that luxury, and it fueled her determination. As the loading continued, a minor incident sparked the first major red flag of the day. Carlos, the man with the bandaged wrist, dropped a small box. The package burst open, spilling canned vegetables across the floor. Jake jumped down from his platform, his boots thudding with menace. "What the hell is this?" he hissed, grabbing Carlos by the collar of his shirt. Carlos stammered an apology, saying his wrist gave out. Jake shook his head in disgust. "If you can't do the job, then maybe you should find yourself somewhere else to work. Or maybe I'll make a phone call, and you won't be able to work anywhere. Ever." He punctuated this threat by practically flinging Carlos aside, ignoring the man's obvious injury. Olivia's heart clenched as she saw the fear in Carlos's eyes. The threat was both blatant and vile. She stepped forward without thinking, her protective instincts on full alert. But Jake shot her a look that could kill. "Don't even think about it," he muttered. "You want to end up like him?" That was all it took to keep her quiet, at least for now. She was painfully aware of the eyes of other workers, all terrified that if they aligned themselves with Carlos, they'd become targets too. Olivia had to remind herself not to blow the entire operation prematurely. She needed more evidence of Jake's intimidation tactics, something undeniable. Moments later, Jake pulled out his phone and started tapping on the screen with a smirk. She had no idea who he was texting or calling, but the possibility that he might actually be contacting immigration authorities right then and there made her stomach churn. She caught Maria's gaze across the loading area. The woman looked paralyzed with fear. None of them could be sure whether Jake would follow through. That uncertainty alone gave him the power he craved. Olivia spent the next couple of hours rotating between different tasks, all assigned by Jake with an air of sadistic glee. Each time she passed by Carlos, she'd whisper a quick, "Are you okay?" And each time, he'd just nod mechanically. She was desperate to help him, but any overt move would put him in greater danger if Jake discovered her real identity. Meanwhile, the cold storage area was drastically understaffed, leaving exhausted workers to hustle double time. Jake stormed in and out of that area as well, offering no assistance, only more insults. The tension was a living, breathing entity in the warehouse, suffocating everyone under its oppressive weight. Eventually, she made her way to the office area, a small room with glass windows overlooking the warehouse floor. She kept her head down, pretending to deliver paperwork. As she scanned the desk, she noticed a small collection of forms with signatures missing. They were likely timesheets or payroll documents. It dawned on her that if she could get a hold of these, she might find discrepancies in reported hours, further proof of wrongdoing. But just as her hand inched toward the stack of papers, Jake's reflection appeared in the glass. She froze. "Elena!" he barked. "No one told you to be in here. Out!" She spun around with a jump. I was told to bring these." She waved a few receipts in the air, hoping it looked convincing. Jake's eyes narrowed. "Just leave them on the table." She did as instructed, noticing how he practically hovered over the payroll sheets, as though guarding them. Her suspicions were all but confirmed. He definitely had something to hide. On her way back out to the loading docks, she heard hushed voices. Maria and another woman, Leticia, were discussing something urgent in Spanish. She caught snippets. "He'll do it if he's angry enough. My cousin was deported last year. And I can't lose everything." The fear was palpable. Olivia's resolve hardened. She realized that for many of these employees, Jake's threat wasn't just an empty promise. It was a terrifying possibility that could destroy families. People here felt alone, isolated, without any recourse. That sense of hopelessness was the real poison Jake spread, and Olivia vowed to find a way to break his hold. Near the end of the shift, Jake ordered everyone to gather by the time clock. He picked up a clipboard and started calling out names. For each person, he announced the total hours for the day, but the math made no sense. People who had worked 10 hours were being recorded for 8. Those who had taken no break at all were told an hour would be deducted for a meal period that never happened. Some employees quietly murmured protests, but Jake silenced them with a withering glare. "This is how it's going to be. If anyone's got a problem, they can see themselves out." A hush fell over the group. Olivia watched the defeated expressions, the sagging shoulders of people who knew they were being cheated but felt helpless to fight back. And that's when Jake capped it off with a sneer. "Immigrants don't get to make demands around here. You want to call someone? Be my guest. Just know I can make a few calls too." The clarity of his threat hung in the air. Olivia felt like she was staring at the heart of the rod she had come to expose. This man ruled by intimidation and fear, and he was brazen enough to hold entire families' futures hostage. She clenched her fists, fighting the urge to drop her disguise and confront him right then and there. But she needed the perfect moment, something undeniably public, so that no one could deny the severity of his actions. Until then, she would endure. Because the stronger her case, the more certain it was that when she made her move, Jake's downfall would be irreversible. The next few days were a slow boil of tension that simmered just below the surface. Olivia kept her head down, but her eyes were open, and she took every opportunity to note each injustice. She witnessed wage theft, verbal harassment, manipulative scheduling, and the looming threat of IC calls that Jake dangled like a sword over everyone's head. Each new atrocity amplified her resolve. She knew the final straw was coming, some incident that would force a confrontation too big to ignore. She just didn't expect it to be so devastating for everyone involved. By the start of the following week, the warehouse was short-staffed again. People were quitting, likely out of sheer desperation or fear. Others were calling in sick, although Jake accused them of faking it. Olivia overheard him bragging to another supervisor about how easy it was to fire workers with flimsy excuses. "They can't fight back if they're not legal," she heard him say, a smug grin curling his lips. Each new revelation felt like a punch to Olivia's gut, reminding her just how badly these employees needed someone in their corner. Jake wasted no time piling extra duties on the few remaining workers, including Olivia Azalena. She found herself in the frigid cold storage area again, stacking boxes almost as tall as she was. Maria was there too, shivering despite wearing multiple layers. "He took my jacket," Maria whispered, her voice trembling. "Said I looked too bundled up and that it slowed me down." Olivia glanced at the cheap sweatshirt Maria wore, which was obviously not enough to keep out the chill. Her anger flared, and she offered to share some of her own layers. But Maria shook her head. "He's watching," she murmured, eyes darting to a security camera. The lengths to which Jake went to maintain his twisted power dynamic were sickening, and it only cemented Olivia's plan. Soon, she would confront him in a way he couldn't weasel out of. A tense hush fell over the cold storage section when Jake arrived, clipboard in hand. He scanned the area, then zeroed in on Olivia and Maria. "You too," he barked. "Company rep is coming for a tour next week. Everything needs to be spotless." He waved his hand to indicate the entire cold storage area. "That means scrub the floors, wipe down the walls, reorganize the inventory. Do it now." Olivia gulped. There was easily a full day's work in that command, and they still had their normal tasks to manage. Maria opened her mouth to protest, but Jake cut her off. "What? You think I'm asking? Because I'm not." The cold, piercing look he shot them left little doubt. Objecting would lead nowhere good. For hours they labored in the frozen gloom, sponges and mops in hand, trying to maintain their composure as their fingers went numb. At one point, Maria slipped on a slick patch of ice, landing hard on her elbow. Olivia rushed to help her up, but Jake just stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching with a sneer. No inquiry about injuries, no offer of assistance, just that unrelenting glare. If there was ever a question about how little he valued his employees, his demeanor answered it fully. Later, as they took a brief moment to catch their breath near the heater vent, Maria confided in Olivia that she was behind on rent because her last paycheck had been slashed without explanation. "I'm scared," she admitted, her eyes welling up with tears. I don't know how I'll support my kids if this keeps up. Olivia wanted to reveal her identity so badly, to promise that she would fix everything. But she held back, knowing the grand reveal had to come at the perfect time to maximize the impact, and to ensure justice would be served. Then came the second bombshell of the day. Out on the main warehouse floor, an older man named Juan collapsed from exhaustion. He'd been working double shifts for nearly a week straight, trying to cover for staff that had either quit or been fired. Jake's response was to throw a bottle of water at him and tell someone to drag him out of the aisle. Olivia could hardly believe the inhumanity. Some workers gathered around Juan, trying to help him. Jake just snorted. He's faking it. I've seen that trick before. A murmur of dissent rippled through the crowd, but no one dared voice it openly. After a few minutes, Juan came to, looking disoriented and weak. Still, Jake insisted he get back to work or clock out permanently. Olivia felt her chest tighten. This had gone beyond mere bullying. Jake's actions were morally bankrupt, potentially criminal, and threatened the well-being of everyone on the floor. She was on the verge of stepping forward, but a small voice in her head reminded her, wait. Gather proof. Make it count. She managed to slip away momentarily, ducking into a storage closet to send a brief text to her trusted corporate investigator. She kept it vague, just a heads up that she was gathering hard evidence and might need immediate backup. The plan was coming together. All she needed was for Jake to go one step too far, forcing the ultimate confrontation that would expose him in front of everyone. As she returned to her station, still fuming, she caught sight of Jake making a call on his cell phone. His expression was icy, and though she couldn't hear the exact words, the mention of "I see" and "someone here" reached her ears. Panic stabbed through her heart. Had he actually called immigration on one of his own employees? She scanned the warehouse, searching for any clue as to who he was targeting. Fear coiled in her stomach as the shift ended, and Jake posted a notice on the main bulletin board. All employees must bring proof of legal status to the office by the end of the week or face termination. The announcement triggered a wave of terrified whispers. Maria looked like she might faint. Carlos clutched his bandaged wrist, eyes distant. Olivia realized the stakes had just gone through the roof. 2 days later, the dreaded ICE inspection was rumored to be imminent, and the atmosphere in the warehouse was that of barely concealed panic. Workers were frantically calling relatives, searching for any documentation that might protect them. Many had perfectly legal work permits, but the threat alone was traumatizing. Any slip-up in paperwork could be used against them. And then there were those who had precarious status, stuck in an administrative limbo that made them prime targets for deportation. Jake seemed to relish the chaos, swaggering around with the confidence of a man who believed he held everyone's future in his hands. On that morning, Jake singled out Olivia. "You! Let's see what you got," he growled, eyeing her with smug satisfaction. He assumed she'd panic, maybe reveal that she had no documentation. Olivia played the part. I left my papers at home," she stammered, lowering her eyes. Jake sneered. "You better bring them tomorrow, or you're done. And maybe I make a phone call, too." He walked off, leaving her standing there with her fists clenched at her sides. This was it. The moment was nearing. She could feel it in the way the entire warehouse seemed to hold its breath whenever Jake stepped into view. If he actually reported her, it would open a window for the confrontation she'd been planning. Throughout that day, Olivia meticulously gathered more evidence. She took covert photos of timesheets that didn't match actual hours worked. She recorded short audio clips on her phone whenever Jake launched into one of his tirades. She had everything she needed to bury him, except the dramatic public showdown that would ensure this matter wouldn't be swept under the rug by any complicit HR official or corporate stooge. She was determined to make it loud and unavoidable. When the night shift ended, she lingered behind to check on Maria, who was near tears again. "I can't do this," Maria whispered. "He's threatening everyone. My kids, I can't afford a lawyer if something happens." Olivia wrapped a comforting arm around her shoulders. "Hold on a little longer," she said softly, her heart aching. I believe something good will happen soon. She meant every word, but the helplessness in Maria's eyes spoke volumes. For these workers, life was a precarious balancing act between survival and constant fear. One phone call from Jake, and everything could crumble. The next morning felt like a crescendo. Word spread that IC agents were possibly on their way. No one knew for sure, but the tension was suffocating. Jake orchestrated a lineup, barking at everyone to stay put until further notice. Anxiety rippled through the group like electricity. That's when Carlos, the man with the injured wrist, stepped forward. "Sir, I need to leave. I have a doctor's appointment," he said quietly. Jake snorted. "You're not going anywhere until I say so." Something about that response lit a spark in Carlos's eyes. He took a shaky breath. "My appointment is important. You can't stop me from going." Jake's face twisted into a sneer. "Watch me." And with that, he snatched the phone off his belt clip and started dialing. The warehouse went dead silent as he spoke into the phone. Though no one heard the exact words, the implication was crystal clear. He was calling IC. The color drained from Carlos's face. Maria gasped. Letitia covered her mouth in shock. This was it, the nightmare scenario. And yet, Olivia felt a strange sense of relief. She finally had the moment she needed, the irredeemable act that would trigger her next move. Jake ended the call, glaring triumphantly at Carlos. "Let's see if you can make that doctor's appointment," he sneered. The cruelty in his tone was horrifying, and it echoed across the warehouse floor. Olivia knew this was the time to act. She stepped forward, her entire body trembling with adrenaline. "You're wrong to do this," she said, voice quavering. Jake's eyes flicked to her, disinterest turning to annoyance. "Shut it, Elena. You want me to make another call?" But Olivia didn't back down. Instead, she reached up and pulled off her baseball cap. She removed the subtle accent she'd been using and spoke in her natural, confident tone. "My name isn't Elena," she announced, letting her voice resonate through the stunned crowd. "I'm Olivia Carter, the CEO of this company." A shocked murmur rippled through the onlookers. Maria's eyes widened. Carlos stared in disbelief. And Jake actually let out a harsh laugh. "Yeah, right," he scoffed, dismissively waving a hand. "You think that's gonna scare me?" Olivia stood her ground. "Check your corporate newsletter or the website if you don't believe me," she said. "Because I can promise you, by the end of today, every single person in this building will know exactly who I am." Jake was momentarily taken aback, but he recovered quickly, stepping closer to her in a menacing way. "I don't care who you say you are," he spat. "I run this warehouse. Get her out of here." He barked at a couple of nearby security guards. Olivia braced herself as the guards approached, but she refused to move. "You want to escort me out of my own facility?" she asked, her voice carrying a razor-sharp edge. The guards hesitated, glancing at each other uncertainly. Jake glared at them, face contorting with fury. "Do it!" he roared. But they didn't budge. In that moment of paralysis, a hush fell over the entire warehouse. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Olivia seized the chance to pull out her phone. She held it up so that the camera faced Jake. "We're live," she announced in a clear tone, starting a stream. The reaction was immediate. Workers took a step closer, curious about the unfolding drama. Jake's eyes flicked from her phone to the faces around him, then back to her. "You think you can scare me with some social media stunt?" he growled. "I'll have you out on the street in minutes." But Olivia smiled, a grim, determined curve of her lips. "You've threatened to call IC on innocent people for the last time," she declared, her voice steady. "I have audio recordings, photos, and witnesses. Try explaining that to the board of directors, if you still have a job by the end of today." The tension in the room thickened as it dawned on Jake that he was losing control of the narrative. He glanced around, seeing the crowd of workers who had just realized they might finally have an advocate. And then something in Jake snapped. His face twisted in fury, and he lunged for Olivia's phone. In one explosive moment, Jake grabbed at Olivia's hand, trying to wrench the phone away. She stumbled but kept a firm grip, determined not to let him destroy her evidence. Gasps erupted from the crowd as the two struggled. The phone swung wildly, capturing a chaotic view of the warehouse ceiling and the cluster of horrified employees. Finally, a forklift driver named Tomas intervened, stepping between Jake and Olivia. "Stop!" Tomas shouted, pushing Jake back. Jake staggered, nearly losing his balance. His face was livid as he whipped around to face Tomas. "You want to get fired too?" he hissed. But Tomas stood his ground, and something shifted in the crowd. Emboldened by Olivia's reveal, more workers began to move in, forming a protective semicircle around her. Olivia regained her balance, phone still recording. She panted, chest heaving, but her voice was firm. "This is all on camera. Every threat, every assault. Keep going, Jake, dig yourself into a deeper hole." She could feel her pulse hammering in her ears, but also a wave of relief coursing through her veins. This was it, the public confrontation she'd been waiting for. Jake stared at the workers encircling him, realizing he was outnumbered. His usual scorn morphed into a look of desperation. "All of you!" he roared, spinning around to address the entire warehouse. "Get back to work, or I'll call immigration on every single one of you. I'm not kidding!" A hush fell, broken by Maria's quivering voice. "You won't do anything," she said, stepping forward. Her eyes were brimming with tears, but her voice carried a newfound strength. "Because she's the CEO, and we have proof." A wave of murmurs rippled through the gathered employees. Some were crying, others wore expressions of grim determination. The fear that once bound them was dissolving, replaced by something more powerful: unity. Jake looked around, eyes darting for an escape. He spotted a side door and took a step in that direction, only to find another forklift operator blocking his path. "You're not going anywhere," the operator said. "Not until you face what you've done." Olivia raised her phone higher. "This warehouse is on lockdown until we get real accountability," she said, speaking to the live audience she hoped was watching. "Jake Reynolds has been calling IC on his own employees as a form of control, withholding wages, denying breaks. And it ends now." A surge of chatter flooded the warehouse. Some employees nodded vigorously, tears of relief streaming down their faces. They finally had a champion who was willing to stand up to Jake, and it just happened to be the highest authority in the company. Jake, cornered, tried to salvage his position with a sneer. "You think you can just waltz in here, pretend to be one of them, and make me the bad guy? I'm doing what's necessary to run this place," he shouted, voice cracking with rage. Olivia's response was calm, lethal. "You're done running anything," she said. "You've broken laws, destroyed lives, and used the threat of deportation as a weapon. I have everything I need to ensure you never work in this field again." The tension broke when the warehouse doors opened and two security officers in official uniforms, not the usual ones who took Jake's orders, entered. They were accompanied by a corporate investigator whom Olivia had quietly alerted in advance. The investigator had a folder in hand, and behind him came a few board representatives who had learned of the live stream. "Jake Reynolds," the investigator said, his voice echoing through the silent warehouse. "You're hereby relieved of all duties, effective immediately. We'll be conducting a full investigation into your actions." Jake's face contorted with disbelief and panic. He started to sputter protests, but the security officers stepped forward. "Please come with us," one of them said, voice surprisingly calm. Jake tried to object, but they quietly guided him away, ignoring his rants about power grabs and unfair setups. As Jake was led off the warehouse floor, a hush lingered. Then someone clapped. Another joined in. Soon, the entire warehouse erupted into a cascade of applause, cheers, and relieved laughter. The tension of weeks, months, perhaps years, dissolved in an outpouring of emotions. Maria openly wept with joy, hugging anyone within reach. Carlos, with tears in his eyes, collapsed onto a crate, uttering prayers of gratitude. Even those who were normally stoic allowed themselves small smiles of victory. The moment felt monumental, like they had collectively shaken off the shackles of fear. Olivia lowered her phone, ending the live stream. A wave of exhaustion hit her, but it was overshadowed by an immense sense of relief and purpose. She stepped forward, raising her hands to quell the cheers. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice shaky with emotion. "I'm sorry it took so long for me to discover what was happening. None of you deserved any of this." It wasn't a formal speech, but a heartfelt confession. She told them she was going to do everything in her power to make it right: back pay, better conditions, and guarantees of safety. She wasn't sure how many official steps it would take, how many corporate red tapes she'd have to cut through, but in that moment, she promised them a new chapter. A ripple of hope spread through the crowd. Some workers called out, "Thank you." Others simply nodded, relief etched in their faces. Maria approached Olivia and took her hands. "You don't know what this means to us," she said, tears making her voice quiver. Olivia squeezed her hands gently. "I'm not going to pretend I can fix everything overnight, but I will make sure no one here ever feels threatened again." She looked around at the sea of faces, exhausted, relieved, and brimming with newfound courage. "You have my word," she added. The group dispersed slowly, still riding the emotional high of what had just happened. Some people hugged each other, while others called family members to share the news that the tyrant who had ruled their workspace through fear was finally gone. The corporate investigator directed the board representatives through the warehouse, presumably to inspect every nook and cranny that had been the site of so many abuses. Meanwhile, Olivia made a quiet exit to change out of her disguise. She was no longer Elena, the undercover worker. She was back to being Olivia Carter, CEO, but now with a renewed sense of responsibility and urgency. When Olivia stepped into the makeshift conference area an hour later, now dressed in her usual blazer and slacks, she was greeted by both relief and curiosity. Her presence felt different in corporate attire, yet the employees who had seen her just moments before knew she wasn't the typical distant executive. She made it clear she would be meeting with each department head, reviewing every complaint, and ensuring restitution for those whose wages had been stolen. The board members, some of whom seemed shell-shocked by the day's events, offered their cautious support. Jake's position was officially terminated, pending a full legal investigation. HR was instructed to cooperate fully or face consequences. In the following days, ICE did not appear, and it became clear that Jake's threats were a hollow tactic. Olivia filed a personal statement that barred any external agency from interfering with her employees without due cause. More importantly, she initiated a thorough audit of payroll records, scheduling logs, and complaint forms. True to her word, she championed every worker who had endured Jake's tyrannical rule. Some required medical care for injuries sustained on the job. Their expenses were finally covered. Others had been fired unjustly. They were offered their positions back or given fair severance. The warehouse slowly began to transform from a place of fear to a place of cautious optimism. It would take time to rebuild trust, but the first steps were already taken. One afternoon, she found Maria in the break room, yes, an actual functioning break room that was now being properly maintained, reading a pamphlet on healthcare benefits. Maria stood up quickly when she saw Olivia. "Thank you," she said, voice thick with emotion. "I can actually feel safe now." Olivia smiled softly, feeling a surge of gratitude that she'd had the chance to right a wrong in her own organization. She also felt a pang of guilt that it had gone unchecked for so long. Nevertheless, the warehouse was starting to buzz with a new kind of energy, the sense that these employees were finally being seen, heard, and protected. Rumors flew around about Jake's fate. Some said he was facing criminal charges for fraud and harassment. Others whispered he might try to exact revenge. But the overarching sentiment was relief that he was no longer a threat. Meanwhile, Olivia pushed for a fresh start, implementing worker councils and anonymous tip lines so that no future manager could wield unchecked power. She also made a point of returning in person regularly, ensuring no one could claim ignorance of conditions on the ground. On the day she officially wrapped up her covert operation, she gathered the employees for a short meeting on the warehouse floor. She apologized formally for the company's failings under Jake's watch and reaffirmed her commitment to fair treatment. As she spoke, she noticed how the employees' postures had changed since her first day as Elena. They stood a little taller, with heads held high, no longer burdened by constant dread. When she finished her remarks, the applause that erupted was genuine, not just polite. And in that moment, Olivia felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: true purpose. In the weeks that followed, the transformation became undeniable. New safety gear arrived for the cold storage area, along with updated training programs for the forklift drivers. Workers reported feeling more supported by a revised HR system that was now under a strict oversight committee. Gone were the days of intimidation and fear. While the changes weren't all perfect and didn't happen overnight, the direction was clearly positive. Even the break schedules were standardized and enforced, ensuring that no one would miss out on the basic rights they deserved. Carlos finally got the time off he needed to heal his wrist, and when he came back, he was assigned tasks that wouldn't aggravate his injury. Maria found herself with a stable work schedule, which gave her time to be with her children without constant anxiety. She'd also received back pay for the hours that Jake had wrongfully docked. Letitia, once too scared to speak up, joined the worker council Olivia had formed. She'd seen how a single person's bravery could snowball into collective change, and she wanted to keep that spirit alive. Meanwhile, Olivia took steps to ensure that any manager stepping into Jake's old position went through rigorous background checks and leadership training. She also demanded regular staff evaluations, where employees could provide feedback without fear of retaliation. The entire culture of the warehouse began to shift, evolving into something far more humane. Perhaps the most striking change was how employees communicated. They began chatting openly on the warehouse floor, sharing tips and supporting each other, unafraid of who might overhear. Friendships blossomed. Even laughter returned, echoing through the aisles that had once felt like corridors of dread. The final piece of closure came when Jake's legal case made headlines in local news. Fraud, harassment, and even extortion charges were being investigated. For many of the employees, that was the vindication they needed, the knowledge that Jake was being held accountable for his abuses, not just spirited away with a severance package. In an unplanned moment, on a busy afternoon, Olivia happened to walk through the warehouse with a small entourage of board members. Maria, bold as ever, approached her and offered a homemade empanada. "For you," she said, smiling warmly. "A thank you?" Olivia, touched, accepted the simple gesture with genuine gratitude. It symbolized the bond of trust she had struggled to rebuild. The atmosphere in the warehouse that day felt hopeful and bright, vastly different from the first time Olivia had stepped in as Elena Rodriguez. People worked hard, but they weren't weighed down by invisible chains of fear. Their conversations were filled with friendly banter and occasional complaints that were normal and expected in any workplace, rather than hushed terror about deportation and lost wages. Olivia realized that sometimes you have to step into the darkness yourself to see just how broken things are, and to bring about the kind of change that really matters. That evening, as she left the warehouse, she paused at the exit to take one last look. Workers were clocking out on computers that now accurately tracked their hours. A few of them waved goodbye, smiling without tension on their faces. It was a far cry from the days she watched them shuffle out with their heads hanging low, uncertain if they'd still have a job the next morning. She walked out into the crisp air, feeling the weight of responsibility but also the warmth of accomplishment. Sometimes, justice requires a dramatic unveiling, and that's exactly what had happened here. She knew it wasn't a fairy tale ending. There would be more challenges ahead, more policies to refine, more managers to train. But this was a victory worth savoring. And as the sun set behind the towering warehouse, Olivia Carter felt confident she had done right by the people who mattered most, the hard-working employees who kept the entire operation running and deserved nothing less than dignity, safety, and respect.